The first conference on here that's listed is 1987. The National Council of Churches had a meeting at Stony Point that none of us were at, but it was a meeting of the different church mission boards and talking about what they were doing in health ministries or what they thought the church should be doing in health ministries. And then in 1988, the first conference that we were at was somewhat of a follow-up of the Stony Point. They had, some of the papers from Stony Point were there, but we don't remember much about that. We're getting old.
What I remember about that first conference, I don't remember what was...
Well, not the Stony Point.
The 1988 conference was that I had been attending the National Council of International Health Conference since 1985. But in 1988, I learned about this meeting that was going to be held following the conference by some Christians. So I got in the elevator and was heading down to that conference and looked up, and next to me in the elevator was the Secretary General of WHO, Halfdan Myler. And I introduced myself because I was a big fan of him. He was the kind of the creator of primary health care and health for all. And lo and behold, he was on his way to the CCIH meeting to encourage that initiative. So I can say that my first connection with CCIH began with the Secretary General of WHO, and it's been better every year.
And he's also a missionary kid from India. And he was a good friend of Carl Taylor, who was also a missionary kid in India, as well as being a missionary himself. So that's one reason why Halfdan was connected with us. But the first conferences we had were at the hotel, either before or after the NCIH meetings, because what happened was that Christians found each other in those meetings, and we all felt like these meetings aren't talking to us. There were a lot of academics, a lot of super professional people, but not people that were really working with communities and grassroots and committed to some of the things that we've heard about tonight. So that's how the CCIH conferences actually started, was because this group of Christians wanted to meet to share more about, common interests that were not being shared in the larger conference. And also the larger conference is so big. And if our conference was before the NCIH conference, then at least we knew some people that were in this big crowd of other people, and so it made it easier for us little Christian nobodies in terms of NCIH. So that's how.
Can I add something now?
Yes, you may.
So the name, because it was so closely linked with the National Council of International Health Conference, that's where the name Christian Conference for International Health came from. And that name was used for the next 10 years. It wasn't until NCIH morphed itself into the Global Health Council that CCIH moved away from being so closely connected to NCIH. That's when they moved to Germantown to hold their conference, and also then organized themselves as an organization, as CCIH. And at that time it was decided, okay, we already have the acronym, but Christian Conference for International Health doesn't fit anymore, so we need to replace the C with something else. So we were on the original board brainstorming that, and we thought about Christian Contemplations for International Health and Christian Cooperation for International Health. That wasn't too bad. And there was Christian Conspiracies for International Health. And finally we got around to Christian Connections for International Health, and that seemed to express what CCIH was all about. It took a while, though, for that name to really stick. Even after Ray Martin became executive director of CCIH, I recall he says that he was once introduced at a meeting he was attending attending as the Executive Director of Christian Concoctions for International Health.
One of the issues that we had in those first years is that we as a group of Christians felt uncomfortable meeting in the Omnishorum, talking about the work that we are doing in developing countries. And so that was a bit of a dilemma. And but for logistical convenience, because we had it in conjunction with NCIH because people were usually going on to that. So it just made sense to do it that way. But that's why we decided to go to the 4-H Center in 1994, just so that we could be in a more, a more informal setting. But it was too hard to work with them. So after a year, we didn't do that anymore. So we went back to the hotels. But then one year with the board, when we were thinking about what we wanted to do for our next conference, we thought it would be nice to have more of a retreat. One of the reasons we come together is to get renewed spiritually ourselves. And what you were saying, several people, and you were talking about, how this really reinvigorates us. And so we thought it would be nice to have some kind of a retreat. And one of our board members thought that, having a Catholic-style retreat would be really nice. Well, I had a good friend a Catholic sister, so I said, well, let's do that. And so that's why we went to Wellspring, because we really wanted to be in a retreat setting, and it was wonderful. And so we did Wellspring for several years, but then we outgrew it, which is great, but Wellspring was such a nice place. And so that's why we moved to Bishop Claggett. And then we kind of outgrew them. And I think there were other reasons why we moved to Marymount was more convenient also. But it's always been hard to know when, a convenient place to. So then after that retreat one, then we started trying to mix, having more of a professional presentations and a retreat. And so that's why we do now, have more of the worship, a lot more of worship in it. And there was something else I was going to say in that. You have something else to say while I think?
You don't
I'm
see Connie and I around very much, but we did our time as board members. Connie was the treasurer, single-handedly handling all the finances of CCH for at least 5 years or 10 years, maybe?
More than 10 years.
Yeah. I was a board member. I was vice president for like 5 years.
I got term limits put in the bylaws so I could get off the board.
My two big contributions were registering CCIH.org as a domain name. And this was early on in the internet phase, and I just beat out the Canadian Council of International Health wanted to register it, but I got to it before they did. And my other claim to fame was recruiting Ray Martin to become the executive director of CCIH. Yeah, there's more that we could talk about the organization itself and the CCIH forum and things like that, but we were just focusing on the conferences because we know you want to party, and we could go on and on. But it's been an incredible journey and incredible people that we've been hanging out with for so many years and have had a lot of fun together. I have one. You're done.
No, I have one more thing to say, but go ahead.
The word connections in Christian Connections. I mean, the obvious connection is the networking that Christian Connections does. For me, the Connections has another significance in that as some of you know, I'm an avid promoter of creativity. I have websites, bemorecreative.com, creativequotations.com. I'll pause while you write those down. Are websites that I use to promote. I have 30,000 quotations on the internet that are linked to the creative process to promote creative thinking. And one of my favorites is from William Plummer, who's a South African educator, who said, "Creativity is the power to connect the seemingly unconnected." And how true that is. I mean, thank goodness for the person who had connected ice and cream to create ice cream. And the story goes that Gutenberg, when he was thinking about how could he mass produce the Bible, was walking down a road one day and saw a wine press on the side of the road and said, if they can press grapes, I can press ink onto paper. And it was that connection he made that resulted in the printing press, which of course the Chinese had created several centuries before that. But I think that, for me, that's a strong point of creative connections for international health that has been in the past, and I'm sure will continue for many, many years in the future.
The other thing I wanted to talk about was the early years, before we had internet and email and all of that stuff. We produced brochures, paper brochures, for each conference. And then we had to mail them, and we did bulk mailing, and that was my job. And when you do bulk mailing, you have to sort them by zip code and blah, 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 blah. So in the 90s, that was how I spent half of my time, was either that or mailing out the CCIH form, because we couldn't do it electronically. So I'm glad now that I'm not a techie person. I mean, it was nice to have those things, that you could actually hold. But in the old days, we had brochures that we produced and we designed and we produced. We didn't
quaint.
Design fancy, yeah.
Very quaint.
We produced on Word, and printed, folded, mailed. So anyway, so that's another part of the first conferences where that's how we got the word out.
Do you have some of those, right?
No, not
What are those that we have over there?
the forum. That's the forum. No. I don't know if any of those brochures still exist. Ray, do you have any of them? No, I mean the brochures for the conference. No, the brochure for the conferences.
Yeah, I have a lot of them.
Huh? Yeah, I know. But that's how we were communicating in those days. It was all by mail. But we did bulk mail so we could save money, So anyway,
So when you get to the food and drinks, take a glass and toast to 30 more years of CCIH connections that will continue our path to health for all that was started so many years ago. Thanks.